Hello, good evening, everybody. Hopefully, this time I've remembered to switch the mic on. I've got a little wibbly wobbly indicatory thing which is going up and down as I'm speaking, so I'm assuming that's actually working. Notice you chopping the top of my head off because of the way I'm sitting, but there we go. The only problem with this laptop is the camera is actually quite good, but it's down here at the bottom of the plinth, which means that when I'm looking at the screen, I'm looking above you, and you can sort of see my see my chin, which isn't right. But anyway, there we go. So I'll have to sort of kind of remember to look down where this little bright dot is at some point, because I tend to look at myself on the screen when I'm talking. But anyway, there we go. Yes, so good. It looks like everything is working, which is brilliant, because last week I was talking for about at least a minute, I think, with the mic switched off. Rookie errors. Anyway, I'm getting familiar with this streaming stuff slowly and surely. So there we go. But anyway, so welcome to everybody who's on stream. So I'm just going down the list. Commander Terra Firma, welcome to you. Alpha Epic 11, Chris, and Magnificent Mako. Brilliant. Thank you, gentlemen, ladies, whoever you are. Can never tell from internet name, so I'll just go welcome. Doesn't really matter anyway, does it? Lovely to see you all, and thank you for coming along to I think episode 4, episode 5. Can't remember what I'm up to now. Of Wagar on writing. So another hour or so of me talking about all things to do with books, novels, writing, creative stuff in general, which is good. So tonight's topic, and I must admit, I was chuckling at Commander Terraformer that thought my description was actually because I hadn't typed anything in. I just description. You put something in there here. That's what description is. But that's kind of the point, actually, isn't it? So description is exactly right. What will we put in that little box? about. No, the actual topic is description, and there's various different bits and pieces to cover on description actually, because it can mean different things in different genres. It can mean different things in different parts of the book, and you use it for all sorts of different stuff. So yeah, so that was good. I deliberately called it description. So if you look on the other videos, you'll notice they've got Wagar and writing dash or something, and then the topic. So it was deliberate, honest. But there we go. That's cool. That's cool. So hopefully everyone's had a good week so far. I must admit, broadcasting on this on Mondays means I can't go and say I hope you had all a good week because it's quite the beginning of the week. But I hope you do have a good week. But I hope you've had a good week since we last did some streaming. I must admit I've been fairly busy doing non-book related things actually. Work was I came back off holiday last week and work was a bit intense. So so I had to get kind of some stuff there sorted out. So plenty going on, but not much I'm doing bookish in terms of creating new stuff. But I was pleased to see the paperback of my current version come out. And I've got some prep on that to do for the launch at Fantastical in a couple of weeks, which should be good as well. So if anybody's going up to, I think we're in Cleethorpes, which sounds very posh. Hopefully maybe I'll see some of you up there. That would be cool if you do. And hello to Sunseal UK. Good to see you as well. Good to see you as well. So anyways, no further ado for me waffling on. Tonight's topic are descriptions. What am I talking about here? Well, inside your novel, your story will generally be broken up into bits of pieces. Some of it will be dialogue. So that's when your characters are having a chat to each other. So Joe says blah, 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 and then Sue comes back with something else. And dialogue is a big important part of storytelling. Then there are sort of kind of action scenes where stuff is happening, like there's a car crash, which we were talking about at great length last week, or a piece of action happens. They're going down a river, and there's a so on and so forth. The boat upturns, and you get chucked out, and things happen that move the story along. Basically, something explodes, or there's a battle, or whatever it happens to be that is pertinent to your story. But description is the bit that kind of glues everything else together, and all these things you kind of think of, I suppose, as ingredients in your story, and you need to mix the right amount of stuff in. It's a very hard balance to get right. So I thought what I'd do to give you some ideas is give you some bad examples. And hopefully some good ones as well to start off with. So I'm actually going to show you a piece from one of my books. I'm going to pop over to the other screen for a moment. My first book, actually, the first one I got published, which was Torn, and show you what, to be honest, now is it's not bad, but it's too much. And this is one of the big things that you'll come across. So I'm just going to pop up the right one. There we go. And then I'm going to go over to this screen over here. So apologies if I'm looking sideways at the screen. And we'll have a look at the monitor here. So hopefully you can see this. So this is the beginning of chapter 4. Now what you'll notice here is that I'm talking about a description of a church from the perspective of this girl who's gone along to this church for the first time. And I'm trying to give you an impression of the church because it's the first time she's been there. And it may be the first time you as the reader have been along to a church of this kind of thing. But what you'll notice is chapter 4 here is this entire section all the way down to here is description. The entire section there is description. And nothing actually happens until we get down to this bit here, where we get a little bit of emotion, which is from the girl here. Katrina looked around in astonishment. So she's kind of like, whoa. But you, poor reader, have had to, you've had to wade through this in order to get there. It's too much. It's too much. Even after 4 chapters, that's too much. And it's really, really important not to do this sort of stuff in chapter 1. You've got to really, really cut to the scene. If you try and dump a massive piece of description like that, at the beginning of a chapter, or particularly at the beginning of a novel, you're going to kill your reader dead. So this really, really does need me to go back and edit this a lot. Now, that doesn't mean that this description is bad, but it means there's too much of it in one place. So I've got, in this first paragraph here, I've got Whedon Valley Fellowship was completely different from any church Katrina had visited before. Well, that's quite good. Okay, so it's not your traditional kind of big stone pointy bell tower type church. Okay, it's brand new. It's a contemporary design. Well, I've kind of already said that in the sense it's brand new, and it's bore little resemblance to traditional church duplication. So that's not really good either. I'm redescribing the same thing in different words, which is a waste. Your reader's going to go, yeah. Tell me something new. Tell me something new. Tell me something new. Then we get to see a little bit of what it's like, and then a little bit about the interior and the entrance. Okay, that's a good point to stop and make something happen. So what I should do really here is have somebody maybe say, "Welcome to the church. Great to see you," and coming in, and then something else happens. So there's a little bit of description, and then something happens, or there's a piece of dialogue. What I've got here is just more description. So you get into the foyer, and there's a bookshop, and there's a library, and there's a coffee shop, and everything's panelled in glossy natural wood. It's it's a nice church, but the carpets, the ambience, more like a cinema. It's a million miles from the tatty old chapel. You're getting the idea. But I still don't stop. The interior of the church. And around here, there's a bit, and there's a raised partition, and there's an airy space, and the focus of the room is the middle, and there's microphone stands, and it's too much. It's way, way, way too much description. So I should have stopped about here, made something happen, and in this bit, I can either not use, I can edit it out completely, or I can dump it in later. Do it in bits where she looks around and goes, wow, look at that. Look how big this place is, after she's done something else. So it's very, very important not to dump a large amount of description into a scene, because what happens is when your readers are going through this, they're going, yeah, oh God, that's where they start talking again down there, and they will simply skip straight past it. And you don't want to spend lots of time crafting all your good stuff for your reader to go and just go straight past it. You just don't want to do that. So down here is when the second page of the chapter. There's an entire page here where actually nothing happens at all. You've got to make something. You've got to weave it in. Exactly right, Commander Terraform. You've got to weave it in with some dialogue, or you've got to weave it in with some action. And I wait far too long here before anything actually happens. That's very important. Now, the other thing you'll notice about this piece of description, which is problematic, is it is all in one sense. And hello, welcome ZX Shadow Wolf. I'm hoping that's a Sinclair ZX Spectrum reference. I'm hoping not too a million miles away from that one. That's pretty good. So anyway, welcome. Thank you for popping along. So what you'll notice here is we're looking at the church. Okay, visual. We're still looking at the church. Visual. We're still looking at the church. Visual. We're still looking around the church. Visual. We're still looking around the church. Katrina even looks around. We're still looking. One sense. Okay. How many senses have we got? We've got 5, possibly 6, depending on how you measure it. It's a reference. I just couldn't have Shadow Wolf on its own, so I put ZX. Oh, never mind. I thought there was some sort of 8-bit thing going on there, but that's cool. So this isn't good description. So here's my critique of a novel. This particular novel I published in 2011 actually got past editors. So swings and roundabouts. But this is a bad piece of description because there's only one sense involved. So Katrina is looking, and that's it. There's no sound. There's no smell. There is no, she's not touching anything, thinking, "Wow, this is so shiny and bright and nice." And she's literally just, and some senses are quite hard. You can't taste your way into a church, obviously, but certainly smell you can. You get that in an old church. You get that polished sort of old book, hymn book sort of smell. Those sort of things work. So when you're doing description, you need to appeal to as many senses as you can. And there's nothing wrong really with the writing per se there, but there's way too much of it and it only appealing to one sense, which will bore your reader senseless. Okay, and they will simply skip it. You don't, if you're going to invest all the time in describing a place, because presumably there's a reason for you doing so, because there's some important detail in there, then make sure that you intersperse it, which is a really, really good point, but appeal to as many senses as you can. So let's contrast this with my latest novel, which hopefully I've done a slightly better job with, and Lords of Midnight. So here I have a character riding into a forest. So Taratha rode within the borders of the forest dreams, and she's thinking about something else. So she's being a bit absent-minded here. So I'm appealing to her emotional state a little bit. I've told you a little bit about where she is, and the fact that last time she hadn't had time to really react. This time the weather is clearer and she can see some ancient stone monuments. And here we go, different senses coming through. So she heard birds upon the air, which surprised her because it's the middle of winter. She shouldn't be hearing any birds. So that's kind of like, that's a bit out of place. What's going on? There's a strange brightness, and so she started looking around, and she starts to see places that are free from snow. It's green, it's lush, it's got wildflowers. This is completely weird for middle of winter. Something strange is going through. The sun suddenly comes out. She's obviously confused, so I've broken it up with a little bit of internal dialogue that I use here, thoughts. So here there's a break where she's having a little think. Here's there's a break, she's having a little think. And then I've stopped with the description, gone back to some action. She stops at the threshold, dismounting, looking around. She's a little bit nervous now, thinking what's going on here. And then she kneels down, feeling a third sense. Thick grass under the palms of her hands, coated in just the finest film of dew. The smell of pollen was on the air. Okay, so we're appealing to as many senses as we can to get the feeling of what's going on. So she's cautious, she's trying to check things out. She's kind of feeling her way through this. She then can see a lake, and there's deers and rabbits and creatures of the forest around. Again, a little bit of description. And then we're straight back into a little bit of action as she walks forward with her horse. And she's walking through tall grasses and flowers, which gives you the impression of what she's walking through. So I've interspersed in a single sentence there some action and a bit of description. And that's the way to build up the picture of what's going on. Let your character walk through your description as you're building it, so that there's a bit of action, there's a bit of maybe dialogue or monologue, depending on the scene, and then you're filtering bits of description in. So you've built up in far fewer paragraphs here a much more comprehensive kind of impression of what I was trying to describe to you. You know, she's come out of a horrible, snowy, frozen landscape, and suddenly the sun's come out. There's the scent of spring up on the air. There's woods, there's long grass, there's flowers, there's a bit of dew. You've got the sense of exactly what I'm trying to do. There's a weird, magical glade suddenly appeared in the middle of nowhere. And that is, hopefully, you tell me or not, that's a better example of how to do description well. So less of it, interspersed with stuff, and kind of broken up into little bits that you go, oh yeah, okay, I'm building up a picture of this now. Yeah, I get where you're going, and your reader is going, oh, I'm still in here because I'm looking for the next piece of dialogue, looking for the next piece of action, and I've also built up a picture of what the author was trying to tell me without actually having to go, oh, here's the description. I'm just going to go straight past that and get back to the dialogue, because you don't want them to miss the description. You've got to go through with that. And then here she's articulating the actual thing that I want you to kind of pick from it. You know, how can this bit of the forest not be in winter? That doesn't make any sense at all. So that's the sort of thing. So hopefully that's a good example. Now, the other thing, particularly nowadays, you've got to be very aware of. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something a bit risky here, because I'm actually going to slate a past master of science fiction. Not deliberately, but just to contrast how things have changed. So many of you will doubtless be aware of this book. Hopefully you can see that. There we go. Where's the camera? Here we are. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne himself. Now, absolutely a master of science fiction. But he wrote this book in, when was it? I can't remember when this was published. This must be a 19th century book. Somebody will be able to tell me with a bit of Google, but it's pretty old now. Um, it's a great book. I mean, I'm not dissing it, but um, let's let's take a bit here to kind of give you an idea of the point I want to come across. So at the end of chapter 6, basically they're on this steamer. This strange creature is with what appear to be luminous eyes is coming towards the ship. Ned, who's one of the guys on board, is about to chuck a harpoon at it. It he chucks a harpoon. They hear the thing go bang, um, as if it struck something hard. They think it's some kind of strange creature. Um, um, a strange electric light disappears. Two enormous water spouts fell on the deck of the frigate. A huge torrent fore and aft, upsetting men, breaking the lashing of the spars. A frightful shock followed, and I was thrown over the rail before I had time to stop myself and fell into the sea. Fantastic end of a chapter. Brilliant. Really, really good. So that's the end of chapter 6. So you're kind of like, what happened? What happened? Are they dead? Are they alive? All that kind of good stuff. And then Mr. Verne starts chapter 7 like this. Though I was surprised by my unexpected fall, really, I still kept a very distinct impression of my sensations. I was first dragged down to a depth of about 20 feet. I was a good swimmer, and this plunge did not make me lose my presence of mind. 2 vigorous kicks brought me back to the surface. No, that's not so good, Mr. Verne. And an editor today would not allow you to get away with that. Oh yeah, long-winded descriptions of fish. Yes, don't get there. I was going to pick that actually, yeah, but this is I kind of done that point about too much description. I thought I'll critique my own work on that one. But you're absolutely right. There is a massive big section in the middle of the book about the different types of fish, and it is snoozeville. But the point I'm trying to make here is you end up this brilliant end of a chapter when they're chucking harpoons and water splashing over the decks and they're thrown into the sea and there's electric lights and all sorts of stuff, and then our antagonist. And this is written in the first person, this particular book. You know, although I was surprised by my unexpected fall, you can't say that. You don't get chucked off a frigate in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, having just tried to harpoon an unknown giant thing, and keep a very distinct impression of your sensations. So measure how many feet down into the sea you went. And then he kind of loses things. So the important thing that the point I'm trying to make here is when you've built up an emotional kind of moment, a real proper cliffhanger, don't diffuse it by your description. Don't diffuse it and go, because your reader's going, oh, that was great, and then it's all gone a bit. It's all gone a bit flat. You kind of want, if you're going to build up some terror like that, you want a kind of really fast-paced bit to happen next before they get out of the problem. And to be honest, with 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, it was written in a time when we didn't have television or radio in the sense that we do now, and so that urgency of text is not something that Jules Verne would have had to do. Today, it wouldn't pass muster, which is a little bit of we're writing now rather than we're writing a 19th century novel. So I'm within my rights to diss Jules Verne a little bit on this one because this was then, and there we did different literary standards in years to come. You notice the same thing actually. I notice it a lot nowadays when I'm watching films from the 70s and 80s. And think, my God, the plotting on this stuff is slow down. When you watch it with sort of 21st century eyes. I mean, I showed my kids Alien, the film, as a sort of rite of passage, to kind of get them into classic sci-fi. And I was shocked to realise that nothing happens in the first half an hour of the film. I thought it was all kind of alien spaceships and stuff, and that's how I remember it in my head. But you watch it again now, nothing happens. The spaceship trundles through space. We hear the characters doing stuff, and they're talking, and we see them eating some food and coming out of hypersleep, and it's really boring. And we get used to pacing on modern stuff, films and books and stuff, where get into the action, get into the story, get things to happen without that much preamble. And sometimes, that can end up with rather cookie cutty stories, unfortunately. But it's a fine balance between writing a book for a particular type of audience nowadays, where you have to have bang, 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 bang action, and a more reflective approach, which I must admit, I look back on films that I remember very fondly from the 80s and think, was it this slow? And it's a good point, Alpha Epic, actually. Has our attention span dropped, or we just got used to a different pace of things? The internet and everything's on and stuff like that. It's interesting, but you've got to bear in mind who you're writing for. So with my books, I mean, I've tried with where's Shadewood? There we go. There's the latest, and I'm working on number 3. This is Shadewood 2. I've tried with every chapter to kind of end on a something bad's happened, and then in the next chapter, then we continue on and cool stuff happens. So that's a thing, and it's a good point. Magnificent Mako there. Yeah, it does have a slow start. Sometimes that's a good thing. Depends what you're trying to do. So if you're trying to build a story which slowly boils up to a crescendo, then that's good. If you want something that's a page turner, you may not have that luxury. And this comes back, and we'll come on to this in future streams, but if you're writing for a particular audience and a particular publisher or a particular genre, there are certain things that people are going to expect. So if you're writing a thriller, you've got to cut to the chase. You've got no option. If you want to, no successful thriller didn't start till chapter 3. It just doesn't happen. Whereas if you're writing a more reflective piece, then you can get away with it. If you're writing a romance, for example, you've got to get the main characters into play really, really early on, and probably have them have a major argument at the start, so you can do that will they, won't they thing all the way through the rest of the book. You've got to get things to occur. Science fiction is probably one of the easier ones, but particularly nowadays with everything being whiz-bang, laser effects and CGI in the movies, people do expect their books to get started as well. But you do have a bit more latitude with science fiction, because you've got the issue of trying to build a universe, build a world. And the same thing in fantasy novels to a slightly lesser degree, I would say, because people have bigger setup ideas of what a fantasy novel kind of looks like. But in science fiction, you have got a bit more latitude, but you've still got to get there quite quickly. Which brings me on to quite a genre-specific point about description in science fiction. So, my writing must belong in the 70s. There's lots of flares. It is a tough one, and when you find if you start seriously writing novels and you find your audience and you find your style and your voice, and again, things we'll discuss in the upcoming stream. If it works for you, then don't let anybody tell you it's wrong. There's no right or wrong with any of these things. So I'm kind of giving you general advice that I've kind of picked up along the way. There's nothing wrong with breaking the rules, because there are no rules. What determines whether a book is successful, and define successful, is down to people reading it. It's as far as I'm concerned. If people are reading it and enjoying it, and they want more of it, then that's good. And I've defined my style as character-driven stories rather than plot-driven. So the characters do stuff, and the dialogue kind of drives the adventure. And then a smattering of description, lots and lots of cliffhangers, very, very dynamic, fast-paced story, which gets you to the end and go, oh, I got to the end of the book. That's what I do. Now, your mileage may vary, as the Americans say. You may want to write a much more flowing, less fast-paced book. And good luck to you. If that's what you want to do, that's absolutely fine. But figure out what you want to do, and then kind of have a look at the genres that you're trying to get to, and kind of say, do I align with kind of expectations there? Don't use it as a straitjacket. They're not rules, but you may find it easier if you kind of align yourselves a little bit with them. And yeah, how long till someone pulls out their phone when watching an old movie now? I know it is hard, actually. I must admit, we have a rule in our house that phones are not allowed when we're watching TV. But it is tempting sometimes, because we kind of get to I noticed myself, my wife and I quite got into what's this? The IMDb site, which is a dangerous addiction when watching old films, because you're trying to figure out where you've seen said actor in some other film. You spend most of the film trying to figure out um, uh, where you've seen a particular person in some other film rather than actually watching the film. But we eventually ended up banning things like that, so trying to enjoy the movies for what they are. So. So, no, yes, I did get to you. So, yeah, that's good. Good Sunsil UK. No problems with that at all. That's good. And description is very much. I kind of think of it as a garnish. Drop little bits of it in here and there to spice up your story, but don't overdo it because then you spoil the whole thing. So that's a bit of a cliche, but there we go. Now, going back to the topic of science fiction. This one's quite interesting because science fiction takes place in a very different world usually to the one that we live in, which is one of the big appeals. It could be on a space station or a spaceship or an alien planet, or could be inside a computer, or anywhere that takes your fancy that's even vaguely scientifically plausible. Now, description in there is probably in some ways more important because you're trying to describe something which doesn't actually exist. And in order for the reader to get even a vague impression of what you've got in your head, there's what else can you do? You've got to describe what you're kind of imagining. So, I mean, that's one of the nice things having written the Elite stuff, is that everybody kind of knew what an Elite spaceship looked like. And because they'd played the game, everyone knew what the inside of a space station looked like, and alien planets you can kind of get away with, a certain latitude on that as well. So that's in some ways easier because you've got a frame of reference to describe against. But if you're trying something brand new, I mean, in my Shadewood series, I've got to describe a creature that doesn't exist. There's no reference to it, and I can't get my character to say, "Oh, it looks a bit like an elephant," because those characters wouldn't know what an elephant looked like. So, how do I describe it? That is a problem. And there's a real danger of going over the line with description in science fiction settings. So I'm gonna read you an example of something that went badly wrong. I'm just going to go back to the camera mode because I don't want to spoil the surprise for you. See if you get it before I get to the end. Right, find my mouse on the right. It's great. Well, it's camera focus. There we are. So I'm just going to look to my left and read you this. He pressed the coded ignition device and was rewarded with an audio confirmation from the conveyance before him. He climbed inside and slipped into the cushioned leather seats and inserted the activation device into the requisite receptacle. In a split second, electrons surged through carefully designed pathways. Fuel, honed by 100 years of expertise, was carefully funneled through exquisitely crafted pumps. Instrumentation illuminated, feeding just the bare essential information back to him, based on a myriad different sensors, all attuned to optimum efficiency. Fires burned, mechanisms performed a stately dance, all to the thrum of power, restrained but ready to be unleashed. A roar of aggression surrounded the vehicle, leaving none nearby in doubt as to its potency. Physics and chemistry combined with biology in the most elegant of symbiotic fusions as John popped down to the shops in his Audi TT. So, I hope you enjoyed that. The point I quite enjoyed writing that actually. The point I'm making here is that if you put that in a contemporary novel, everyone would go, "What on earth is that?" Because nobody describes the internal workings of an internal combustion engine or an Audi TT or any other car in a contemporary novel. And the reason for that is that everybody in the world knows what a car is, unless you're living somewhere very, 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 very far away. You don't need to explain that you need to start the car and the fuel inside the car is. I'm glad I managed to get some of you with that one. But this is the point. See, so you were assuming one thing, and I went somewhere. I deliberately misled you on this one. But basically, it's just a description of a car. But it's way too much of a description of a car. Okay, so yes, there's instrumentation which is fed by sensors, and there's and there's a coded ignition device. It's just a flipper you unlock the door with. And what else did I say? Fuel honed by 100 years of expertise, petrol. Okay, just petrol. And fires burn, mechanisms performed a stately dance. Well, yeah, just pistons going up and down as you start the engine. And there's a roar of aggression. Okay, well, it's got a frigid exhaust. There we go. But it's just somebody popping down to the shops in their Audi TT. Okay, so what I've done here is I've gone for ridiculous to kind of prove a point. In this case, my character is John. He pops down to the shop in his Audi TT. He's going to get some eggs or some milk. There's something about to happen in the rest of the story where him popping to the shops is part of the story, the plot. But I've overdone the description here in a contemporary setting to make it look ridiculous. But what happens in science fiction is we get a lot of description about the stuff in the science fiction world. So John pulls out his psionic laser blaster and waited for the tachyon diffuser to charge or something. John wouldn't do that because in the universe of wherever we are setting our novel, a tachyon enhanced plasma phaser laser rifle thingy is just whatever they happen to use. You don't find in the Western people talking about the chemistry of the bullets and the explosive compression force of the barrel and think you just pull out the gun and fire it. And the same way in the science fiction universe, you should expect your characters to be intimately and completely blasé about the technology that they're using. So it's much more natural for a somebody in the far distant future to be completely blasé about the spaceship. They wouldn't notice it. In the same way that we get on a bus, they'd get on an intergalactic space liner. Just another thing. So in order to put the description in, you've got to be much more subtle. You can't do it like I just did it there, because it throws you out of the setting. Someone said there, it alienates the car from the reader. So yeah, I've exaggerated that one dramatically, because what it appears from my description is John is doing something spectacularly, weirdly unusual, but actually he's just driving his Audi TT down to Tesco's. In your science fiction book, it's very important for your character. If you want them to be doing something really weird and unusual, then that's okay. But if they're just doing something that is routine in that universe, then that's a different thing. They should just do it, and they should just be and maybe they can idly look out of the window at the passing stars or whatever it happens to be. But you mustn't make a big thing of it because it kind of breaks it down, all that sort of stuff. So that's an example of doing things. Now I had this problem with Elite Reclamation. Have I got a copy of it up here? Yeah, there we go. See if I can find the section I'm looking for. Where was it? Oh yeah, so here we go. Quite near the beginning, I've got a bit where they are right at the beginning. I've missed it. Here we go. The Imperial Ambassador is having a chat with the Federation guy, and there's basically a hologrammatic communication mechanism, and it has a name in elite lore, which is the holofax system. So all I've said here is the holofax system indicated the connection was being made, and Tenim watched as the form of his counterpart, Imperial Ambassador Cuthrick Delaney, took shape, flanked by two of his aides, apparently sitting at the far end of the table, despite actually being several light years away. That's it. It's just a telephone call. And it's as normal to us as Skype is. The holofax system in Elite Dangerous is exactly the same thing, just with 3D holograms. They start talking, as we would on the phone. There's nothing more to it than that. And the only things I add in are the ability to use a little bit of gesture control to put images inside the 3D mechanism. And that's it. I don't do any other description about the lasers or whatever it is that's generating the holofax system, because I don't actually know how it works. Star Trek's actually quite good at this sometimes. Mike Okuda was once asked about the Heisenberg compensators in the transporter, and asked how did they work, and he said very well. So stuff like that is sometimes less is more. Quite often, less is more. So that's good. So anyway, just seeing the chat's moving up. I better catch up. Imagine someone from the 1600s going in a car. I'd love to try that. Wouldn't it be great to go back in time and grab somebody like Galileo and stick him in an Audi TT? That would be great fun. They would just, they'd be terrified. I think because if you've got no context for that sort of speed at all, and you know, yeah, yeah, a great great grandfather. What would they make of our world today? I must admit, my grandfather. I sometimes look around me and try and use his eyes as I kind of knew him as a child. Sort of say, what would he look at around here and be startled by? And I think things like flat screen televisions and the size of the monitors and things that we have nowadays, the size of the cars and the speed at which we drive them would be terrified. Very very different to him. But so many other things are still the same. I think the mobile phones and everything like that would be kind of remarkable as well. And the further you go back, the more those technological advances seem amazing. But in that science fiction context, your characters live in that universe, so they shouldn't be surprised by it. And so what you've got to do is you've got to make a choice between what is the mundane but cool technical stuff that you want to have in your novel versus what's actually the really unusual stuff that you do want your characters to go, whoa, what the hell's that? Whether it's an energy field or it's some weird spaceship or it's a spaceship doing something that spaceships can't normally do, a wormhole or whatever it happens to be that is the unusual thing that you need your characters to react to. So I did that sort of thing in Shadewood when you have this, and also in Elite actually in Reclamation where there's this eclipse that happens every day, which on Earth would be kind of like, whoa, that's really weird. An eclipse every day, that's just bizarre. It's pretty and it's nice, but it's just another thing to the people who live on a planet where that happens regularly. So things will become mundane to the inhabitants of certain places, are just unremarkable. So you've got to make sure your characters are authentic to the scene that they're in, and don't get kind of startled and therefore force you to go into lots and lots of description about what's going on because you're trying to give that impression over to the reader. You've got to find another way of doing it and then just drop that in. Your readers, and this is a really important point, one thing that I learned, it took me a while to learn, your readers, and in this case, if you guys have read any of my book, I need to kind of apologise, but your readers are generally smarter than you think they are. You need to give them credit for the fact that they could read what you're putting down and make some assumptions and go further than just what the text is. You don't need to spell it out for them. You can give them just give them a bit of dialogue, a bit of description, and then their minds hopefully will go off and paint the picture of what you're trying to describe. Now, it won't be the same picture as the one that you've got in your head. And to be honest, you could never do that. The only way you can do that is turn your book into a movie and go, there's the definitive version. That's in some ways limiting it. What I like to hear is when with a little bit of description in one of the books and people come back to me and say, oh, I saw it like this and I saw it like that. And somebody else will go, oh, no, but it was sort of like this, surely, wasn't it? And when you said this, it meant that. And they're both right and they're both wrong because that's not how I saw it. But their view of it inside the book is perfectly valid as well. So give your readers, don't spell everything out for them, particularly in the description. Don't overdo it. Give them enough for them to carry away and go, okay, so it's sort of that sort of shape and that sort of smell and that sort of size and it's warm and it's hot. Let them run with it. So people are still talking about bringing people back from the past. This is excellent. So journeys which would take days or weeks by foot or horse would become doable in just a few hours driving. Yep. That's a good point, actually. I even remember when I was a kid, when we used to drive to go and see my gran from Kent to Berkshire. That was quite a major undertaking. We used to sort of set off on Friday evenings with a tool bag in the back of the car in case it didn't make it. Saturday was sort of spent at Granny's house, and then Sunday was the morning was sort of spent when my dad fixed in the car, so we had a chance to get him back again. So a journey to Berkshire, which must be only about 90, 100 miles there and 90, 100 miles back. Back in the 70s was a bit of an epic, Whereas nowadays it's like, traffic permitting, it's an hour and a half around the M25 and job's done. We didn't have the motorways back then, so that's a change in my lifetime. So, and go back further. If a horse is the fastest thing that you've got, or just on foot, then the difference is astonishing. When I go to London, I'm commuting 65 miles every way. That would be unthinkable 150 years ago to just do that on a daily basis. That's insane. And I like the it's not very accurate, of course, but I love the Bill and Ted episode where they bring back all the historical characters and give Beethoven a synthesizer, and Genghis Khan gets a a baseball bat, I think. All sorts of stuff like that. That's quite fun. So alphabetic. So how would you be able to describe something which is really abstract for the reader but casual for the character? Because some of the detailed descriptions would probably fascinate readers. Yeah, this is it's very much dependent on what you're trying to do. I think what you can do is you can try and put it into the story. But you've got to find a way of diluting it so that it doesn't spoil the action, doesn't spoil the pace. So you can just layer it in. That's one approach. What a lot of books do will put things in appendices. So if you want to know more about the XYZ, here's more about it. Some people really like the detailed bits and pieces. They'll pour over detail like that, but that's usually once you've hooked them into a story. So that may be something to do. You can drop bits of description in every time the object or the thing appears, so that the reader builds up a picture of it over time. And if you've got a multi-book series, you can obviously do that multiple times, and then explore different facets of the object you're talking about. I definitely wouldn't recommend dumping it all in one hit, though, because unless you're a particularly dedicated reader and you're absolutely invested in whatever it is you're reading, you will skip it. You just go, oh, this is too much. I want to get back to the story. I don't need the next facet of the whatever the XYZ is, unless you've got a very, very dedicated reader. So you'll have more latitude to do that in science fiction than you will in most other genres, I would say, because people are expecting science fiction to potentially push the envelope in terms of imagination and description and things. So you've got a little bit more latitude in there, but so those are the sort of things I would suggest in there. You can also get your characters to refer to it, kind of offhand remarks. I mean, a spaceship, a classic good one, from Star Wars is Princess Leia's "You came in that," which instantly gives you the impression, if you read the book, that it's the Millennium Falcon is an old clunker of a ship. That single piece of dialogue gives you it's a battered old ship. Great. And then Luke's, I could buy my own ship for that. What a hunk of junk, all that sort of stuff. That bit of dialogue is actually quite good, because it instantly gives you the impression of a ship that is, not very impressive from the outside. And then, you can explore other facets of it. It did the Kessler run in so many parsecs, which is meaningless, but it gives you impression it's souped up. It's got something more to it that meets the eye, which is quite a nice way of building up those kind of things. Whereas obviously the Millennium Falcon is just a ratty old freighter, as far as most people wouldn't spare a second glance at it. In the same way, a knackered old truck on our roads, we wouldn't necessarily look at it and go any different. But if it's subtly souped up under the skin, then that could be particularly interesting. So there are some kind of contemporary analogies to that sort of thing that you might be able to play with. So, but you've got to be cautious. You've got to not over-egg the description in favour of the dialogue and the action, because you will lose the flow of the story. So that's a hard one. So so we've gone through Jules Verne. We've just one of my favourite authors. I've torn apart one of my own books, and what I wanted to do is give you a little bit of one of my favourite authors, a little bit of a masterclass. I don't know if any of you have read this. Some of you may have done. This is Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca. Now, this is not science fiction at all. but it is a very emotive um, kind of description. It's almost dreamlike. And what I was going to do is just read you the first paragraph here, because I don't know if I can get away with reading too much more, because it's probably copyright. Um, but to give you a little bit of the prose, that I think this is one of the best books I've ever read in terms of characters and description of the way it works. But just to kind of give you an example of what I think good looks like, and we'll give this one a try. So last night I dreamt I went to Mandalay again. It seemed to me I stood by the iron gate leading to the drive, and for a while I could not enter, for the way was barred to me. There was a padlock and a chain upon the gate. I called in my dream to the lodgekeeper and had no answer, and peering closer through the rusted spokes of the gate, I saw the lodge was uninhabited. No smoke came from the chimney, and the little lattice windows gaped forlorn. And then, like all dreamers, I was possessed of a sudden spirit with supernatural powers, and passed through the barrier before me. The drive wound away in front of me, twisting and turning as it had always done. As I advanced, I was aware that a change had come upon it, and it was narrow and unkempt, not the drive I had once known. And at first I was puzzled and didn't understand. And it was only when I bent my head to avoid the low swinging branch of a tree that I realized what had happened. Nature had come into her own again, and little by little, in her stealthy, insidious way, had encroached upon the drive with long, tenacious fingers. The woods, always a menace even in the past, had triumphed in the end. They crowded, dark and uncontrolled, to the borders of the drive. The beeches with white, naked limbs leant close to one another, their branches intermingled in a strange embrace, making a vault above my head like the archway of a church. And there were other trees as well, trees that I did not recognize, squat oaks and tortured elms that straggled the cheek by jowl with the beeches, and had thrust themselves out of the quiet earth, along with monster shrubs and plants, none of which I remembered. And that's just the intro. So it's that's chapter one. So, and if you know this story, it's kind of a weird ghost story, really. The protagonist Rebecca is actually dead. She's not even alive in the entire story, and kind of haunts the characters within. And it's a very emotive piece of writing, which I'm probably not doing justice to, but it brings you in with this sort of sinister, mystical. I've been here before, but it's not how I remembered it. It feels a bit. You're getting that kind of shifting, kind of shiver down your spine sort of thing going on with that story. And you may be aiming for that in your story. So that's the other thing you can do with description, is you can put some emotion into it. In that chapter, you probably saw it as you were kind of thinking, analysing it, if you didn't get swept up in the story. The trees are dark and uncontrolled. They have a strange embrace. Squat oaks and tortured elms. You get this kind of horrible sense of these trees fighting for each other, and it all being dark and sinister. And there's a padlock and chain upon the gate, and it's rusty. Time has obviously passed since something else has happened, and that's the impression that the author is trying to give you as to what's going on here. It's a wonderful piece, and actually, to be honest, the entire first chapter there, pages 1 to 4 in this book, is mostly description, but it's got that sense of trouble. It's got that sense of I was once here, and I know I'm in the right place, but it feels unfamiliar. It's sinister. It's secretive. It's silent. It's kind of got moonlight flickering down. It's kind of your classic house on the hill, lightning bolt stuff, but without over dramatizing it too much. So there's no dialogue in here. There's no action per se, but there's this lovely sense of doom and foreboding building in the description, which sort of sets up the rest of the book as stuff. And there's if you haven't read this, there's a brilliant twist in it. So I really recommend that one. It's kind of good fun. So going back all over that then. So description, don't do too much of it, and don't dump it into your story in a great big chunk, because people will just skip it. So that's the first point. Secondly, interweave it. That's really important. So mix it up with dialogue. If you can get your characters to experience it, then do. And remember that thing about the different number of senses. Don't just look. Okay, if there's a smell, and it's sometimes hard to do in, let's say, science fiction. But for example, if there's a static discharge or something, then there's flickering light and electrical stuff. But there's going to be that sort of sense of ozone in the air around anything that's like that. So try and bring the other senses in, stuff that you can hear, stuff you can feel. So if you're near the engine exhaust, you might feel the ground vibrate. That's a good way to get across that there's this really thumping noise coming through. Not just describe the massive sound, but the actual physical representation of it. So bring in as many senses as you can. If you can feel, you can taste, you can see, you can hear, all those sort of things. Bring all those into the description as well. So those are the three. So not too much. Use the senses and interleave it. That's really good. In your science fiction setting, try and avoid explaining what the technology does, unless it's really, really important for the reader to understand what it's actually getting. If it's a plot point, and this is where Star Trek falls down, is they use a lot of techno-babble to get themselves out of trouble. So, the tachyon inverter needs to put a coherent tetrion beam or something. That sounded quite good. You may need to do that depending on what you're writing, but that's a bit of a weak way of using description to kind of drive the plot along. You can do that, but again, be aware of it. You're not just techno babbling for the sake of techno babbling. And if you do need to techno babble, make sure you're consistent inside your own stories. Very important. Use the description to add a bit of flavour. Don't overdo it. Drop it in bit by bit, and build it up over time if you can, which gives your reader a chance to kind of assimilate it, because they'll be reading through it and enjoying the story and go, oh yeah, no, I've got a feeling of what this thing looks like, and you've kind of populated their imagination without them realizing, and that's a smart, clever way to do it, rather than telling them exactly what they need to see. So all the points I made in previous videos about kind of show, don't tell. If you can show your people what the thing looks like by the way the characters are admiring it or sensing it or feeling it, that's much better than saying it was blue and it was tall and it was sharp-edged. He says, trying to make something up on the spot. Show don't tell applies to all of these things, not just the general flow of action and those sort of things. So that's important there. And rather like Daphne du Maurier, if you can inject, and I haven't tried this actually, this is a good reminder for me, try and inject some emotion into the description deliberately. So you've got this sort of sense of shivery foreboding that she's put in her description. Something I haven't tried actually. I tend to use description just to set the scene and kind of get on with the action. So, put some of that stuff, emotive stuff into that description. That's another technique you can try as well. It's quite an interesting way. So all those bits and pieces you can combine. And again, like anything else, you don't get good at it unless you just practice. So that's a good thing as well. So in Alphabet 11 there, instead of telling the reader where they are, bring them physically there and show them what's happening. I think that's good. Yeah. So for example, if you describe the spaceport was big and it was full of ships, and there were bright lights and a spaceship was ahead, and you walked towards it and got in. Bit dull. Whereas if your character, John looks up and instinctively ducks because a spaceship is just roaring overhead, the ground shakes as the exhaust flux makes everything vibrate. That is a little bit more of a compelling. It's happening to him at that point, rather than you just stepping back in a third-person view and going, "This is what's actually occurring." So try and make it personal. Try and make the characters experience it a little bit. That's what I tried to do with Tarathiel. The example I gave you with Lords of Midnight is that she's kind of, oh, what's going on here? This is weird. This sort of summery glade in the middle of winter. What's happened there? Rather than just saying it was a summery glade, there were deers, there was a lake, it was nice, the sun was out. Dull. Okay. Whereas Tarathiel's kind of, this doesn't make sense. How can there be summer in the middle of this, winter? That's impossible. But it's here. So what's going on? Try and get the emotions. Try and get the characters involved in the description rather than just sort of saying, this is how it is. It's the show, don't tell, all over again. Yeah, subtle, but it's important to get the difference. Reminds me of school where you had to show an object and tell people what they need to know about it. Yeah, things like that are quite good writing exercises. So if I just put an object in front of you, it's a mouse. You can say it's a mouse, or it's a black mouse, or if you're very smart, it's a Microsoft mouse. But we could find other ways to describe that, which might be more interesting. And I remember when I did that back in school, and I brought the same thing in twice in a row, and I had these yeah, that's a bit unfair, isn't it? Yeah, Elite there again. It's a spinning space station, so maybe they get nauseated because the centrifugal forces get worse the closer you are to the rotation axis, as your head is way lighter than your feet. Yeah, well, that's an interesting one. It depends on the size of the station and how fast it's spinning, I guess. But yeah, I did that similar sort of thing to that in Elite Reclamation, where the first thing that poor Sloby does when she's first awakened, if you recall in that book, is she just pukes. And there were two reasons for that. One of which was I thought that would probably be the reaction for somebody who spends their life on the ground, on a planet normally, to suddenly waking up in a zero-G environment with no preamble at all. Because I've actually had the privilege of speaking to what's his name? One of the British astronaut, Chris something. I can't remember his surname now. It'll come to me. And asking him what his experience of spaceflight was. And he said his abiding memory of being on the International Space Station was blocked sinuses and throwing up. and involuntary, how did he say? Involuntary expulsions of air from posterior parts is the other thing that he said. I must admit, I had visions when I was a kid of going into space, and it sounds very, very glamorous and having great fun. But having gone through his description of what it's actually like to transition from gravity to Chris Hadfield, that's the guy. Yeah, he came to one of our astronomy meetings, and he basically said, gravity, or lack of gravity, or microgravity, obviously as it is. It does really, really weird things to your psychology. Your fluids that are naturally present in your sinuses can't drain, so they just build up, and you just completely get a blocked head. So you've got this sort of low-level blocked nose headache all the time you're in space. And when you first go up, your body's used to gravity being obviously orientating you down. So it just feels like you're constantly in a falling lift for the first day. So you get one thing like that, and you're sick instantly because you just feel like you're falling down a lift constantly. Is he a Canadian? Sorry, that's my mistake. Oops. I should know because I'm Canadian too. So anyway, we had this long chat, and all these things are kind of like, space travel doesn't sound nice at all. So if you go from gravity into zero-G and you're not expecting it, you're going to throw up. And that's so simple. So I wanted that to kind of be vaguely accurate. And the other reason for it in Elite Reclamation is just to kind of take poor Salome from, highly privileged imperial princess with decor and glamour and, poignancy and code of conduct and grace and sophistication all the way down to kind of brass tacks. And she's just, first thing she does is just heaves out her guts all over the floor. And it kind of gives you the impression she really has come a long way down the kind of social strata, and that was the other reason I was doing that. You can play around with those sort of things a lot, and that's kind of gives people an emotional connection with the character. They just think they're just feeling ill because they're in a particular situation, like a space station where there's some weird gravity going on. And I must admit, I experienced this because going back to the Elite topic, I played. I played Elite on Elite Dangerous for a long time on my monitor, and completely. And I read science fiction, and I'm familiar with zero-G, and I know some of the physics, and I'm an astronomer, and the idea of having a centripetal, I suppose, if we're going to be completely accurate, force holding the space, holding the ship against the interior of the space and it's rotating, all makes sense. And every direction is down from the center, and da 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 da. And people walking around above you makes perfect sense in that environment because you understand the physics. And when I fly my spaceship into the inside of the Elite space station and dock on my monitor, absolutely fine. But I tried it in VR, and some of you may resonate with this experience. And I was fine, absolutely fine, as I approached the space station, and I'm seeing it spinning. And then I lined it up, and then as the space station got big enough that my visual, you know, what I could see in the VR environment was basically the entire space station. No longer had reference to stationary stars in the background. I instantly started rolling to the side. And it was fortunate that people are used to this with VR, that they actually caught me before I rolled myself off the desk and onto the floor. I couldn't dock. I couldn't dock in VR. I managed to do it eventually, but I felt so ill within just a few seconds because the rotation. I knew I was turning the spaceship right or left, or whatever it is, to correct for the docking, but there was no longer any visual cue that I was doing that, and my brain just went, zzz, and it just got instant motion sickness, and that was that. Now that's just a trivial example. You multiply that into a spaceship where there isn't actually no zero G, and you've probably got limited visibility. What the hell's going on? You can see stuff moving around, and there's inertia and all sorts of stuff. No wonder astronauts are sick. You've got to have a really strong stomach to cope with that kind of stuff. So I don't think space travel's at all glamorous. My 8-year-old version of me can go out and do it, but the 48 version of me is not going up into space. It doesn't sound good at all. Some people can cope with it, some people can't. I was surprised because I'm usually okay. I mean, I don't mind roller coasters and those sort of things. But VR in certain conditions, and docking in Elite was one of them, which completely threw me. So that's one of those interesting things. But anyway, that's digressing. But there we go. So again, in summary, it's another thing in your arsenal of good stuff to get right and practice on it. So description, don't overuse it. It's there to do a purpose. Filter it across all your story. Use it as a garnish on top of the recipe, just kind of to add a bit of flavour to what's going on. That's my favourite way of talking about it. That really helps. But it is essential. But it's like anything, any kind of garnish. Overdo it, you spoil the entire recipe. So kind of be cautious on that one. That's going to be quite good. Daddy Hoggy's just arrived. Apologies for later on, just as we're about to stop. Hello, sir. Good to see you. Good to see you. Simulator sickness. It's usually the inversion of motion sickness. Oh, it's got a name. I didn't know that was a different thing. And good evening. Apologies for everyone. No worries. And somebody's name I can't read because it's green. Really, Steve. Steve Shaw. Hello, sir. Good to see you. Not to Roy. It's all being recorded, so I'll put it up onto YouTube in a moment. But yeah, we've been talking about description tonight, which is quite a multifaceted topic actually in analysis at the end of the day, and just about how to do it, how not to do it. Some examples of good, bad, and indifferent. Some of mine we've dissed Jules Verne along the way, which has been quite good, and we've given a hearty thumbs up to Daphne du Maurier, amongst others along the way. So that's quite good. A repeat question. Oh yes, you did have one the other week, didn't you? Alpha Epic. Repeat my question. And while I'm answering this, if anybody else has got any other questions while we wrap up the stream, then feel free to chuck them into the chat now. That's a good time. I'll see what I can do. Repeat my question from previous live stream again. How can you write in a way and use description but still leave enough for the imagination for the reader? Well, it's a balance. It's difficult to know whether you succeeded until someone's critiqued what you're doing. So I think it's really something you can only learn with experience. If you look at my two examples back over here, where we go. So this one, where we got torn. So this is me in 2011 with a published novel, and that's where I've dumped a load of description into the chapter 4. I wouldn't, my own filter wouldn't allow me to write something like that now, but back then I thought it was okay. So, you get better the more of this you do, and you get more self-critical. So you compare that one with what I've just done in Lords of Midnight. There's a bit of description here. There's a bit of description here. There's a bit of description here. There's a bit of description there. See how I've interspersed it throughout the text. So it's that's better. It's not perfect, but I've got better, and that's really just by doing it. and listening to hopefully podcasts like this and taking advice and looking at other ways of doing it and becoming aware that I can improve what I've written over time. And generally writers are quite arrogant about these things when they write their first thing. And I thought with Torn I'd done a really, really good job. Now when I go back and look at it, I can see ways to improve it. But I couldn't see them at the time because I didn't have the experience to go and see it. So the only way you can really get better, to be honest, I think, is trying to is just doing more of it and getting it out there, and then looking at the critique you get back and trying to improve it. There's lots of stuff like that that just gets better with practicing. You should reread the plot just description for them. Oh, you might enjoy this. Yeah, okay then. So let me go back and do that for the benefit of those of you who missed it earlier on. So see how many of you get this. Right. So this was a little game that I was playing with description. He pressed the coded ignition activation device and was rewarded with an audio confirmation from the motorized conveyance before him. He opened the door, slipped into the cushioned leather seat, and inserted the activation device into the requisite receptacle. In a split second, electrons surged through carefully designed pathways. Fuel, honed by 100 years of expertise, was carefully funneled through exquisitely crafted pumps. Instrumentation illuminated, feeding just the bare essential information back to him based on the myriad different sensors, all attuned to optimum efficiency. Fires burned, mechanisms performed a stately dance, all to the thrum of power, restrained but ready to be unleashed. A roar of aggression surrounded the vehicle, leaving none nearby in doubt as to its potency. Physics and chemistry combined with biology in the most elegant of symbiotic fusions, as John popped down to the shops in his Audi TT. I did enjoy writing that. So just to get back on that one, that was the how too much description can be a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with it per se, but it's out of place in a contemporary story like that potentially could have been. So I hope those who missed it earlier enjoyed that. That was quite good fun. So I'm afraid my stream can only last an hour because I've got things in the morning, and B, the entire day at work, and I can't keep going for too much longer. But it's quite good. If you want to clip it, that's absolutely fine. It's a good example, actually. I can't claim it's entirely original. The text I've used there is entirely original, but the idea actually came from somebody else. I remember doing something similar, and the last phrase is just a kind of like, oh, it's just somebody going down to the shops to get some eggs or something like that. And if your description is good, and hopefully that maybe transported your way to, is he talking about a spaceship or some kind of amazing submarine, or what's he talking about? And it's just a Audi TT. Not that there's anything wrong with Audi TT, in case anybody drives an Audi TT, but it's just basically an example of how you can overdo it, which is quite good. And I've always found metaphors work better than similes almost 100% of the time. I think, you're probably right overall. I tend to use a bit of a blend of both, to be honest, but I'd say that's probably more a style thing than it is anything else. But I'd probably favour metaphors over similes, I think, that's quite good. I should save that, shouldn't I? I've just realised I'm going to save that. Not an Audi TT or something like that. We're going to stick that just under, I think I'll stick it under stream. There we go. I might want that again. There we go. Oh, that's quite good fun. You can't clip the entire thing. Oh, maybe I'll have to turn it into a little video excerpt for you. Is it too long or something? That's a shame. Never mind. I'll see what I can do for you on that one. Do you need the actual audio, or are you after the text there, Shadow Wolf? And to answer Alpha Epic, yes, I do upload these to YouTube. So I'll point. I've got one of those follower things. Vengeful Ghost. Hello. Yes, I've got a YouTube channel which is here actually. You can see it on the screen. So if you go to YouTube, for some reason it's /c/Drew Wagar. Don't ask me why. That's where my YouTube channel is. I will see if I can extract that audio clip for you then, Shadow Wolf. I'm sure I can manage that. And I'll let you know where you can pick it up from. That'd be good fun. But there we go. So, are there any other questions before we wrap up for this evening? Let's see if the chat's there. Seems to have gone quiet. There we go. That's good. I'll give that a moment. Just put some bits of music. I'm quite pleased with that Audi TT thing, actually. That went down quite well. I shall try more sort of off the cuff. I wrote that actually in the last sort of 10 minutes before coming on the stream. I thought, I've got a really good idea. I think I might do that. That's kind of quite cool. So I won't make any change to the other bits and pieces. That's good. Add it to the Twitch description. Yes, I could add the text, but it kind of, I think the audio works as well. Yes, I actually, yeah, you're talking about YouTube there, aren't you? So yes, I will add that to the Twitch description. That's a good idea. Definitely. That's easy for people to find. But you can follow that on Twitter and Facebook if you're into those sort of things as well. That'd be good. Will I be at Fantasticon this year? Yes, I will. I'm there the entire weekend, I think. I've got to do a book reading or something to do with Lords of Midnight. So, and that's sign a few paperbacks as well, hopefully. So that should be fun. And bringing up the family as well to see people. I think a few other folks will be there as well, which would be great. So if you're there, then do come and say hello. That'd be really good. It'd be good to put names to faces, to avatars, to usernames, etc. Brilliant. Thank you very much, everybody. And yeah, Alpha Epic, thank you very much. Pleasure to have your company this evening. Thank you very much for popping along. Oh, you did actually meet me. I apologize. I'm terrible with names, let alone usernames. It's good. So good night, everybody. And if you are going to Fantasticon, that will be great. I will see you there. I won't be streaming this time next Monday, I'm afraid. Being a bank holiday, I've got some other stuff to do. So we'll be back in a fortnight. I'll put a little message to that effect on the Twitch stream. But we will see everybody back then. So I will upload this to YouTube shortly. That'd be great. So thank you very much. And I will see you all in a couple of weeks. That would be fantastic. And I still haven't got anything. Still haven't got a phrase for signing off. I really must come up with something. So I will just say, see you in a fortnight, and we'll go there. Lovely to see you all. Take it easy. Bye bye now.